Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. And today we're going to bring you more actual history from this book right here, Indian Depredations in Texas by J.W. Will Barker. But first, I'm going to read a section from the Texas State Historical Association site on the man by the name of Jesse Burnam. Jesse Burnam, pioneer, was born into poverty in Madison County, Kentucky on September 15, 1792. He was the youngest of 7 children. His father died soon after his birth. The family moved to Shelbyville, Tennessee in 1808, and there Burnam met Mary Temperance Noel Barker, whom he married on September 6, 1812. During service with the Tennessee militia in the War of 1812, Burnam contracted an unspecified illness that eventually drove him to seek a warmer climate. He arrived in Texas in 1821 and led his own and 9 other families to a settlement at Pecan Point on the Red River. He remained there for a number of months before traveling farther into the Texas wilderness. He stopped for a time at the site of present-day Independence, Texas, and finally in 1823 settled down on the Colorado River in Fayette County. Burnam, who was a member of the Old 300, his name was 13th on Stephen F. Austin's land grant list, was ceded an area of land now in Fayette and Colorado counties. In 1824, he established a combination trading post and ferry that soon came to be known as Burnam's Crossing or Burnam's Ferry. This crossing, which Sam Houston eventually destroyed during the Texas Revolution in order to prevent its use by the Mexican Army, remained for some years the most northerly settlement on the Colorado River. We do not know the native state of this venerable pioneer, but we know that he came to Texas with the first immigrants to Austin's old colony. He settled in Fayette County on the Colorado River. At that time, the section of country where he lived was constantly exposed to Indian depredations, and as settlers were few and far between, he was compelled to rely mainly upon his own good right arm and his trusty rifle for protection against them. In the summer of 1830 or 1831, a party of raiding Indians came into Burnam's neighborhood, and finding he had a caballada of very fine horses which were pastured on a beautiful prairie near the house, they concluded to take possession of them. In order to make sure of getting the whole caballada, the Indians boldly entered the pasture in open daylight in full view of the house, and drove the horses off. One of Burnam's little children, who happened to witness their proceedings, ran into the house and told him the Indians were driving the horses away. At that time, Burnam was sick in bed with fever, but this bare-faced robbery of his fine stock of horses provoked him to such a degree that he got up immediately, saddled his riding horse, and taking his gun, started off solitary and alone in pursuit of the Indians. He soon came to the trail made by his horses and those of the Indians, and after several hours of hard riding, he caught sight of his caballada, moving on rapidly before a dozen Indians in the rear. He reined up his horse a few moments to consider what was best to be done. After resting his horse a little, he came to the conclusion that he would either recapture his caballada or else lose his scalp in the attempt. He was satisfied his only chance of success against such odds was to charge boldly against the Indians, give them a volley as he advanced from his double-barreled shotgun, and thereby endeavor to throw them into confusion by a sudden onset, and to stampede the horses so completely as to render it impossible for the Indians to control them. And in that event, he was confident the horses would take a beeline for their old range. The horse Burnam was riding was a very fleet animal, and he thought that if he should fail to stampede the caballada, that at any rate he would be able to make good his escape. So he set his spurs to him, and almost before the Indians were aware of his proximity, he let fly both barrels of his gun at them, and dashed through them, whooping and yelling as he passed, right into the midst of the frightened horses, which were stampeded so badly that the Indians were unable to check them, and they went off like the wind, with Burnam in the lead, in the direction of his home. The Indians pursued them for some distance, vainly endeavoring to turn them in their mad career, but finding it was not possible to do so, they finally abandoned the chase and left in disgust. A few hours afterwards, Burnam arrived safely at home without the loss of a single animal. This is the only instance I know of in which a dozen Indians were charged upon in open prairie by one man alone, and all their stolen property recaptured from them. Someone asked Burnam how it was that he ventured alone to attack such a number of Indians, and he replied that he was sick and mad at the time, and had been so provoked by their previous depredations upon his property that he had made up his mind to foil them at all hazards on this occasion. We can understand this, as we have been very sick frequently, as well as angry, and no doubt, if we had been in Burnham's place, we would have done some desperate charging too, but it would have been in the opposite direction from the Indians. So that's the end of this story right here. This one is a lot more, lighthearted than some of the tales in this book. So no one actually died in this story, which is quite an exception. But Burnham lived to a very old age. I think he was the oldest surviving member of Sam Houston's army, the oldest surviving member of the Texas Revolutionary Army at the time that he died, which I believe was in the 1880s. And so there's also another article that recently came out that I'll provide a link to in the description for this video. This was written by one of Burnham's descendants, who also still has the last name of Burnham. So I definitely recommend that you check out that article if you're interested in this topic. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.